Hello Internet, my name is Quentin and this is Blondihacks. Well, I'm working on the locomotive this week and I gotta do some catching up on the finishing work. I've let it pile up for quite a bit too long, so we got a lot of painting, powder coating, and other similar things to do, which I promise is more interesting than that might have sounded. So let's go. Progress has been good on the metalworking, but you can see we've got lots and lots of exposed brass and copper at the moment, and I need to catch up on all of the finishing work. Going all the way back to the ash pan and the saddle, lots of stuff that all needs to be black because North American locomotives are black. Contrary to our UK friends, North American locomotives are very utilitarian in appearance by and large. They're pretty much just painted with a giant black spray gun head to toe. Some of the passenger locomotives were a little more gussied up, like 2816, the Empress, because passengers like their locomotives to be pretty. But for the most part, our locomotives were freight all the way down the line, and nobody cares what freight locomotives look like. They just need to be cheap, so they paint them black. After stripping everything down, I have to make some decisions about how to do all of the various coating jobs on this. If you're watching this series, you know that I'm primarily powder coating everything. If you're not familiar, brass is extremely difficult to paint. There's just about nothing that sticks to brass. It's really quite incredible. And every time I bring up this problem, I do get lots of suggestions in the comments for various products that people say work. And I do appreciate that, I really do. And I have tried pretty much everything that's been suggested to me, but for the most part, it ends up being stuff that people haven't actually tried on brass, or they've used on brass but haven't done real abrasion tests on it to see how not durable it actually is. Or it's things like scale coat that no longer exist, or things like Cerakote, which require a lot of special equipment, HVLP guns, and so on. That's why at the start of this project, I did a whole bunch of coating and paint tests for durability and ease of use, and powder coating was the clear winner. The equipment is simple, easy to use, doesn't take up a lot of space, and the finish is extremely, extremely durable, even on brass. The challenge with it, though, is that it does not have really high temperature support. So for that reason, we've got a lot of stuff here that can't be powder coated. I'm kind of sorting things into what I think can be powder coated and stuff that's probably going to have to be painted with high temperature stove paint. Because as we recently learned, the smoke box actually gets very, very hot, and a lot of the stuff touching it will get very hot as well. So I'm kind of making some educated guesses, and I kind of think the stuff on the right is all going to have to be stove painted, and the stuff on the left can maybe all be powder coated. That creates one more new wrinkle, though. For stove paint, I've been using this stuff, barbecue stove paint. That's what I used on the boiler, but this stuff is flat, and I need it to match the powder coat because it needs to look like the powder coating. And that doesn't matter for the boiler because it's all going to be covered anyway. The paint is mostly just there to hide any copper that might be showing, and boilers are typically flat painted anyway. However, this stuff is flat, and I couldn't get it in gloss, and it also requires a high temperature primer for durability that hilariously the same store I bought this from does not sell. And I know you can get that stuff in big cities, but you have to understand I live 6 hours from a city and I have to make do with what I can find locally, or sometimes I can buy stuff online, but a lot of stuff like paint, hard to buy online because the couriers can't ship it because of the chemicals and the pressure vessels and so on. So if at all possible, I got to make do with what I can find locally. And in this case, I went back to that same store and they did have this stuff. This is a different brand, although they got bought by Rust-Oleum anyway, but this is a traditionally Canadian brand of paint, and they have a high heat paint that is gloss. And very interestingly, this stuff specifically says on it, priming not recommended. So, I mean, great, that's easier. I don't have any illusions that this is going to stick well to brass regardless, but it's worth a shot and it's the best I've got. I'll start with the powder coating because that's a process I know very well. I start by hitting everything with a little red Scotch-Brite, primarily to clean any loose crud off the surface, flux, solder residue, char from the torch, that kind of thing. And then everything gets very thoroughly degreased with acetone. The degreasing is the most important step for powder coat. Powder coating is pretty forgiving as far as the surface prep, but the one thing it really depends on is the surface being completely oil-free, because it's going in an oven, and if there's any oil hiding in any cracks or screw threads or anything, that oil will bubble up under the heat underneath the powder coat and create what are called fish eyes. And that will ruin the part. There's really no way to fix those except stripping it and starting over. I've been told one thing you can do is pre-bake the part before you powder coat it, and that will bubble all the oil up out of the cracks and then degrease it and then powder coat it. I haven't actually tried that, but it does sound like a good idea, so I'll probably do that next time I'm doing a more complex assembly. But for things like this ash pan, it's so simple that a degreasing with acetone is just fine. Then it's a simple matter of hanging the part, connecting a ground wire to it somewhere, and spray on the powder. This is the Eastwood home powder coating gun, and it works super, super well. It's a dual voltage gun, so on the higher voltage, the powder sticks much better, and on the lower voltage allows you to get into tight corners where the voltage can create kind of a force field effect with the static electricity that'll keep the powder from getting into nooks and crannies. So those two voltages combined make it a really easy job. It's also worth shining a bright light on there and checking for any thin spots in the powder. I've learned this the hard way. If there's any thin spots, when the powder melts, it kind of pulls tight like a rubber glove on your hand. So if there's any thin areas, those will become bare spots in the coating. So if there's any doubt at all, hit it again. You can't put too much powder on as far as I can tell. Slather it on there, it's cheap, and make sure that you don't have any thin areas. Then the trick is to very delicately bring it down into the oven and hang it in there without it touching anything, because of course that powder is literally loose and just touching the surface. So if you touch anything on that surface, the part is ruined again. You got to blow all the powder off and start again. For tricky parts, it's good to do a little practice hang before you put the powder on. Make sure you know how you're going to get it in the oven without touching anything. And then after about 15 minutes for a part this size, I take it out. I've learned just from experience about how long a given part takes to cure based on the mass of it, but if you're not sure, you can use an infrared thermometer and make sure that it's hitting the powder coat curing temperature. And then I bring it out and hang it up so that, again, nothing can touch it until it's fully cooled. When it's first coming out of the oven, the coating is still soft, and again, if you touch it with anything, it's ruined. You gotta strip it and start over. You can get a good pipeline going. While that one was curing, I was prepping and powder coating the next part, and so I can cycle them through the oven pretty much continuously. The 10 to 30 minute cure time, depending on the mass of the part, is just about right for prepping and powder coating the next part. So for a situation like this where I'm powder coating 10 or 20 parts in a day, I can pretty much just keep that oven cycling all day and not waste any time. Any areas that require precision fit should be masked so that the powder coat doesn't interfere with the fit. Or in this case, this is an unusual situation. These are the back plates for the headlamps, and if you recall, they are an electrical connection because the battery uses this as a chassis ground. So this needs to connect, so I'm masking these off, and masking with powder coating can be done with Kapton tape. Kapton tape is high temperature, of course, and also doesn't really stick to things all that well, so it comes off clean, just like a nice masking tape. It's really wonderful stuff. It is extremely spendy, however, so don't use it for anything except specifically powder coating where you have no choice. There's really no other tape that can stand up to the powder coating oven. There's one other little gotcha with powder coating, however. The cure temperature of this powder coat is 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perilously close to the flow point of plumbing solder. You might recall the bracketry on these back plates is soft soldered in place. I was reminded of that as I removed these parts and inspected them, and they looked fantastic except for the part where I had to pick up the brackets from the bottom of the oven. Oh, quiet down, stupid crows of infinite hindsight. They're so arrogant. Was this frustrating? Yes. However, it was also the perfect setup for the greatest triumph of my model engineering career to this date. Yes, behold, I was able to resolder that bracket to the back plate without melting the powder coat on the other side. With very, very careful torch application, I managed to do that, and the powder coat was undamaged. Yeah. How do you like that, crows? Yeah, you don't like being shown up, do you? Oh, I know your kind. You go for the eyes. Well, guess what? Let's go. That's what I thought. Yeah, you never moor your feathered ass right out of here. Oh, you're coming back with a murder of friends, whatever. Unfortunately, it only worked once. The second time I did damage the powder coat, and so that one's now soaking in the acetone to dissolve the powder coat, and I will do that again. However, I'm actually going to paint the second one. I'm not going to attempt that stunt again. Now for the box lamps, I masked off the inside because the internals are a precision fit, but I did have a problem that sometimes happens when powder coating. You can see that the Kapton tape leaned over a little bit at some point and ended up masking off part of the edge, and there's some exposed brass there. Now this is where powder coating is more trouble than paint, because with paint, of course, you just touch that up, no problem. With powder coat, however, you can't really recoat a surface. Now, all of the books say that you can do multiple coats or different colors and mix them, but I have never gotten that to work. When this happens, I try again anyway, and this is what always happens to me. You can see that the fresh glossy area went on okay, where the brass was kind of close to it, but where the existing powder coat was, it doesn't really stick or flow properly, and it just ends up with a dull, gritty surface on it. If this was an unimportant part, I might have left that, but it's the headlamps. They're a really prominent feature. People are going to be looking closely at them, so I stripped this one all the way back with acetone once again and redid it, and that came out much, much better. I did end up with some overspray inside this one, as you can see, but that's easily removed with some acetone on a rag or a Q-tip. A little bit of overspray inside is no big deal to remove. I've also masked the back, as you can see, to make that a good electrical contact. With that, I can get this piece reassembled, and let's see if everything still works. The electrical contraption here, of course, as I said, relies on good electrical contact there, so see if that still works, and it does. Look at that. Well, that's an excellent result. The black with the brass trim ring really looks fantastic. I'm very pleased with that. All right, I'll get the rear one installed now. There's nothing stopping me from getting that permanently on the locomotive. It still works. Very, very nice. On to paint now. I'm going to paint the back plate of the other headlamp, as I said, and for the painted elements, I'm starting by putting a really aggressive key on them with 120 sandpaper. Again, just try to give them the best possible chance of adhesion on the brass, and then a thorough cleaning and degreasing once again with acetone. And here we go. I'm following the all prep and spray directions for this paint on the can, which in this case call for multiple thin coats, as you would probably expect. So I'm doing that. I'm doing 3 to 5 coats per part, depending. I'm also making use of a Lazy Susan for spinning the parts around. That always helps a lot. This paint booth, if you're wondering, is the Werner Company's portable spray tint thing. It looks a little gimmicky online, but actually they really, really work. It's got a standard furnace filter in the back of it, so it's easy to replace. And then behind it is a standard 20-inch square box fan. And it does a fantastic job of pulling all the overspray back and keeping it out of your shop. It doesn't protect you from the fumes from the volatile organics. A standard furnace filter, of course, is not rated for that. So you still have to wear a respirator when you paint, but it does catch all of the paint pigment and overspray, so you don't cover your shop in overspray. This paint looks fantastic. I'm extremely pleased with the results. I can tell already that it's a little bit soft still, even after 24 hours. This is an enamel paint, and a lot of these high heat enamel paints, they actually rely on the object getting hot to bake the paint on and actually obtain full strength. Sometimes they say that on the can, and sometimes they don't. I've found that with a lot of the engine paints, they often don't say that on the can, but that is in fact how they're working. The first time you run the engine up to temperature is when the paint actually gets strong. Others, like the Pour 15 enamel that I have, says you can bake it, or if you let it sit for up to a week, then it will get full strength that way as well. So I'm hoping this is similar to that. So I can tell the paint is a little fragile right now. I'm being careful with it, and I'm just going to let them all sit for a good week or two before I subject anything to any kind of stresses. Hopefully it'll be durable enough, but again, I don't have any illusions that it's going to be super durable on the brass and copper, but it's the best idea I have right now, and hopefully it'll be okay. So I'm starting to get things reassembled now, the ash pan going in first. Now, the next thing that's of interest is the hardware. A lot of this stuff is held on with very visible fasteners, and most of them are brass, of course. So my solution to this is brass black, which is a chemical kind of like metal blackening for steel that you use for cold bluing tools, for example, but it's specifically formulated for brass. And I find this stuff works pretty well. The nice thing about it is it's essentially a zero thickness coating, which is important for these tiny fasteners, especially the number 0 screws. Any kind of paint or anything else is going to clog up the screwdriver slot. So I need something that isn't going to do that. It's also not super durable, and depending on the piece, sometimes it doesn't get fully black. I find somewhere between 3 and 5 treatments for each screw seems to work pretty well. And again, some of them don't get 100% black, but at least they get to a very dark patina, which makes them less apparent. At least there isn't a giant splash of brass kind of in the middle of the part giving away the game. Of course, I get regular furious comments that I'm not making scale fasteners for every single piece on this locomotive, and I've explained at length why I'm not doing that for this, my first locomotive. I'm more focused on getting it finished, and also maybe try being nicer on the internet to strangers. If you're food for thought, you do you, but, try being nice. Well, let's get this baby back installed on the chassis. Pretty exciting. It looks really, really good. I'm very pleased with the appearance of that paint. I hope I don't scratch it all up too soon. And that sits down there nicely, and, well, I very naively thought that, hilariously, in fact, naively thought that this was going to be the last time the boiler would go on, so I thought, I can do the insulation around the steam manifold now. So I proceeded to stuff that full of ceramic wool. Literally the moment I tightened the final screw on the panel underneath here is when I realized, oh no, it's definitely going to have to come off at least one more time, probably 2 or 3 more times. Which is annoying because this under panel here is actually quite difficult to install because those rear screws are completely blocked by the cross linkage on the drain valves. And I pretty much have to strip them out every time I install them because of the angle of the screwdriver, but none of that is your problem. Smokestack and smokebox door can go on next. They also came out really nice. The black really sets off all of the accents, like the stainless steel grab irons and the brass trim ring on the headlight. Woof. I saved the best for last, the number badge. I started by painting the back of it. I was going to powder coat it, hence the Captain tape, and then remembered luckily in time that the number is soft soldered on. So I painted the back with the high temperature paint, and now I'm going to mask off the black and I'm going to paint the number area itself. I decided to do something a little fancy here because it's the number, and the number should look nice. The number badges were one area where even North American locomotives did get a little fancy. With the existing black area masked off, I can now take it back over to the paint booth, and I've got this engine enamel here. This is the red that I used on the wheels. So it's kind of my splash of accent color elsewhere on the locomotive, so I'm going to use it for the background of the 5. Again, lots of thin coats, let everything dry, yada yada. Then over to my lapping surface, which is just some pieces of glass that I put sandpaper on, and I'm going to rub the red paint off of the high spots, which is of course the outer trim ring and the number itself. Always sand in figure 8 patterns when lapping, because that prevents creating angles on the surface from uneven pressure of your hand in one direction or another. If you go back and forth in a straight line, you'll pretty much always change the flatness or squareness of the surface you're sanding. Now with that all sanded clean, now I can take it downstairs to my model railroad bench because I'm going to prime the number and paint it white. I've got this stuff here. This is a one-shot primer, which is specifically engineered partly for brass models, and it works really well on those. It's actually one of the few primers I found that works pretty well on brass. But of course you can see the size of the bottle it comes in, not practical for the big locomotive. This stuff's more expensive than heroin. I assume a great feature of this primer is that it's designed to be sprayed or brushed. Most model scale primers have to be airbrushed on, and I didn't want to do that here. It's too much hassle. But brushing it on, very easy. This is actually a military modeler primer, hence the aggressive branding, but those folks often have the best paints and primers in my experience. And then I went over that with a basic acrylic white paint once that primer had cured. The white was chosen because that's the same color as the rest of the livery on the tender and what will be on the cab, so I thought a red background with the white number would really tie the room together. Well, I am very, very pleased with where this is at now. That was a lot of work. I mean, it doesn't look like much in a 20-minute video, but that was 7 or 8 days of continuous prepping and painting and waiting for things to cure and powder coating and fiddling and redoing things that I'd screwed up and so on. But the effort is worth it. It's really, really looking like a boat now. Well, thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my patrons for making all this happen, and I'll see you next time.